we're seeing very substantial inflation. It's very interesting. I mean, we're raising prices. People are raising prices to us. It's being accepted.
Inflation is currently a huge concern for everyone on the planet. For the last 1 to 2 years, this has become the main conversation among individuals, companies, investors, and politicians. In this video, we will see out and analyze a hierarchy of different investing categories and how successful they all are during inflation periods. This is all by the words of Warren Buffett, who has spent the majority of his 91 years of age accumulating an elite level of knowledge and real-life experience on inflation. This video took hours to research, and the goal here is to give you the knowledge you need to succeed. In return, please make sure you like this video and subscribe to my channel. That's all you have to do. Subscribe to my channel right now. Now let's crack on. The worst form of investment during inflation periods is cash. Warren Buffett is among many well-known top investors who clearly are not fond of holding cash during inflation. Fellow billionaire Ray Dalio has also been particularly vocal about his dislike of cash, even coining the very memorable and catchy quote, "Cash is trash." The reason for this is during inflation periods, cash sitting in your savings account or in your mattress at home is gradually losing all its worth every day, every month, every year. Perhaps the biggest take-home from watching this video is that you need to consider your investment returns on what are referred to as real terms. There is simple math behind the calculation of your real return on an investment. For example, if your investments return you 10% a year, that's pretty awesome, right? Well, maybe not. It depends entirely on the inflation rate. You need to calculate the real return on your investments by subtracting out the impact of inflation. If inflation is 6% and your investment returns 10% that year, your actual or real return is only 4%. Not quite so high anymore, is it? It's for this reason that cash is the least valuable investment in our hierarchy here. Technically, the return on holding cash is essentially zero. The effect of inflation is allowed to work against you when you sit on cash for long periods of time. So what's better than cash? That's easy. Fixed interest rate bonds are the next best thing in our hierarchy. Buffett may argue otherwise, but most standard investors believe these instruments are considerably safe and secure. However, Warren Buffett has challenged this view in that they may not seem as secure when factoring in the impact of inflation. The following is why Buffett argues this. For example, let's say a 10-year US government bond is currently yielding around 1.8%. So today, purchasing a 10-year government bond for the next decade every year, a 1.8 annual return is essentially locked in. Let's also say that inflation averages 4% over the next decade, which isn't much of a stretch given that most recently the inflation report identified inflation at 7%. With 4% inflation, this means you are then left with an annual real return of negative 2.2% if inflation is at 4% and after you have considered the impact of inflation on your return. Now this is still superior to just holding cash, but is also still a long way from the best option.
You know, if we dropped $1 million of cash into every household in the United States today, everybody would feel very good, except the people that invested in things that were denominated in dollars.
One essential point is that people lose during inflation periods when they own fixed-rate debt like government bonds. On the other hand, the winners are those who borrow money in a long-term structure at a fixed rate. People who employ mortgages to buy property are a great example of this. Let's say I bought a house in December 2021. As a mortgage rate, I was able to lock in a 2.8 fixed rate for 30 years. So for the next 30 years, my interest rate will remain the same. For 30 years, my monthly mortgage payments will also stay the same, regardless of any interest rate rises in the market. This is a fantastic position to secure during inflation periods. Think about it. As the months and years go by, inflation decreases the full value of the mortgage debt. I am now able to repay my mortgage debt with dollars that are devalued and rendered of less worth by inflation.
If you own a home, though, with a very large mortgage and you have incredible inflation, it wipes out the mortgage, and you've still got the home. I mean,
in Weimar, Germany, they gave you the mortgage back at the end. That was very interesting. That's the one thing they did right.
Next up on the hierarchy is what Buffett references as unproductive assets. These are commodities like gold, silver, and other precious metals. These kinds of assets are considered safe havens and fantastic stores of value. That means that during periods of inflation, the value of these assets keep up with inflation, allowing your wealth to retain its value. The problem is, although considered a safe way to lock in your wealth, these are called unproductive assets for a reason. Unless, for example, there is a big spike in the price of gold, they won't increase your wealth much either. Let's listen to Warren Buffett explain this.
I would say this about gold. If you took all of the gold in the world
it would roughly make a cube 67 feet on a side. So if you took all the gold in the world, we could have a cube that went down there 67 feet, 67 feet high, and that would be the whole thing. Now, for that same cube of gold, it would be worth, at today's market prices, about $7 trillion. That's probably about a third of the value of all the stocks in the United States. So you could have a choice of owning a third of all the stocks in the United States, or you could have a choice of owning that little block of gold, which can't do anything but kind of shine there and make you feel like Midas or Croesus or something of the sort. Now, for $7 trillion, there are roughly 1 billion acres of farmland in the United States. They're valued at about $2.5 trillion. It's about half the continental United States is farmland. You could have all of the farmland in the United States. You could have about 7 Exxon Mobils, and you could have $1 trillion of walking around money. And if you offered me the choice of looking at some 67-foot cube of gold and looking at it all day, maybe touching it, and fondling it occasionally, and then saying, do something for me, and it says, I don't do anything, I just stand here and look pretty. And the alternative to that was to have all the farmland in the country, everything, cotton, corn, soybeans, 7 Exxon Mobils, just think of that, add $1 trillion of walking around money. Maybe call me crazy, but I'll take the farmland and the Exxon Mobils.
So what's a more superior investment than unproductive assets? Well, the next category in our hierarchy is more about simply keeping up with inflation. Like you and me, most investors are looking for assets that will safely outperform inflation and produce a significant return. Now it's time to look at what Warren Buffett refers to as productive assets. It's common knowledge that Warren Buffett made his fortune and built his vast wealth by buying stocks and entire businesses. But as Buffett himself explains, not all businesses are created equal. These productive assets are known as average businesses. Average businesses have a couple of main characteristics. The first one being that these business types require large quantities of extra cash or additional capital to keep operating.
Unfortunately, most businesses will not come out well in real terms during inflation. Their earnings may go up a fair amount over time, but they're compelled to put more and more dollars into the business just to stay in the same place. And the worst kind of a business is one that makes you put more money on the table all the time and doesn't give you greater earnings.
Here we have a stripped back example for you. United Rentals is a real company with ticker symbol URI. This is the largest rental equipment company in the world that has a very simple business model. The company purchases equipment for construction projects, things like heavy-duty trucks, bulldozers, portable restrooms, etc. United Rentals then turns around and rents out that equipment to construction projects for the duration of their project. It goes without saying that all this equipment that is constantly being rented out is not bulletproof, meaning it doesn't last forever. Eventually, things need to be replaced. So every few years, United Rentals needs to replace any worn out or broken equipment. Now, for example, let's assume that every bulldozer costs the company $1 million to buy and can generate $1.2 million in sales over its lifetime for United Rentals. This means each bulldozer generates a $200,000 profit. But what if inflation is currently at 20%? Factoring in this inflation, the next bulldozer United Rentals buys will actually cost the company $1.2 million outright. See what this means? Essentially, the United Rentals profits are eaten away by the impact of inflation, so the company isn't able to generate profit. Every dollar of profit earned by the company must be invested straight back into the business to pay for the new equipment. This is like running on a treadmill, trying to catch a $100 note hanging from your head in front of you. Even though there is no real expectation of inflation hitting 20% and everyone familiar with the industry knows how great of a company United Rentals is, the above example clearly illustrates the challenges faced by a capital-intensive business during inflation periods. Essentially, the business model is not resilient to the effects of inflation. Before we move on to the next investment type in the inflation hierarchy, here are some wise words brought to you by Charlie Munger, the business partner and arch-nemesis of Warren Buffett. Charlie Munger said, "There are two categories of good businesses. The first one is the business where the whole reported profit just exists as surplus cash at the end of the year. Whether you take the profit out of the business or not, the business will do just as well regardless. The second kind of business is the one that reports a profit but never has any cash. This is similar to the used equipment construction business of my old friend, and he would always say, "In my business, every year you make a profit and there it is, sitting in the yard." And the world is full of these kind of businesses, which need to always spend the cash they generate just to keep the business alive and continue existing. Let's move on to the next form of undesirable business. During times of inflation, it is advisable not to invest in businesses that do not have pricing power. But what is pricing power? Well, let's use an example of a company we all know that has great pricing power today. One company commonly associated with pricing power is Apple. Apple has perhaps the most well-established and loyal customer base on the planet. These customers are willing to pay for Apple products at pretty much any price the company chooses to charge. Just think, someone who has their heart set on buying an iPhone will not be distracted by cheaper prices of other companies' smartphones. If someone wants a new iPhone, they aren't going to buy a competitor's product just because it's cheaper. Compare this to companies that have no pricing power and the first consideration in their customer's mind is the price of their products. For example, a company that produces plain bottles of water with no unique selling point, no special branding, and no special mineral content, this is a business that has zero pricing power in today's market because the market is likely going to purchase the most affordable bottle of plain water they can find on the shelf. If the plain water company attempts to raise prices to beat the impacts of inflation, customers will very quickly switch to the products of its competitors, which are cheaper. These customers care the most about price. Needless to say, the business will struggle in times of high inflation. All relevant costs to the business are likely going to increase. The cost of extracting the water will increase. The cost of transporting the water will increase. The cost of packaging the water will increase. Factor in the increased cost of paying workers and now you really have a problem. The only thing that doesn't increase is the price the company can charge for its bottled water. As you can see, this is why inflation is an absolute nightmare for companies with no pricing power. So, given that all of the investment examples above have not held up well at all against the impacts of inflation, are there any better investment models that can survive this kind of environment? The next investment category on our inflation hierarchy is one we call productive assets, or in other words, great businesses. These can be best explained with another great example. Earlier on, we spoke about the company that spent $1 million purchasing a bulldozer to be rented out. What if our friend Steve here used that same $1 million instead to develop a software product that functions to provide a valuable solution for online content creators who make videos on YouTube? Similar to the construction equipment company, Steve also makes $1.2 million of profit in his first year from his software product, leaving him with a $200,000 profit. Pretty fantastic, right? But that's not all. Now let's also factor in the formidable 20% inflation to this example. As a result, Steve is now able to charge 20% more for his software product this year. But what does this mean? This means that the $1.2 million Steve had generated in sales last year turns into $1.44 million due to the 20% inflation. What's even better is that Steve doesn't have to reinvest any more money back into the business as his software product is already fully developed. He already has the software, and while he may have to spend some money upgrading it and maintaining it, this would be a very minimal amount. Not to mention, Steve is able to charge more for his product. His software business provides YouTube creators with a unique solution for which there are very few competitors. In other words, Steve has great pricing power. Not to mention, Steve is able to charge more for his product. His software business provides YouTube creators with a unique solution for which there are very few competitors. In other words, Steve has great pricing power. In other words, Steve does not need to fork out another $1.2 million on new equipment every year. This is the direct opposite of a capital-intensive business. Steve's software business would actually be considered a capital-light business because minimal amounts of capital are needed to reinvest into the business in order to maintain operations and inventory. Because of inflation, John can actually take his profits out of the business with very little impact on his software company's success. In this instance, Steve has actually benefited from the impact of high inflation. Amazing! Well done, Steve! The purpose of this video is really to allow all of us to find our inner Steve. In order to find a business that performs well during inflation, you want to find pretty much the exact opposite of the mediocre business that we talked about earlier. Do your research and look for companies with low capital requirements. These companies need not reinvest large sums of money constantly in order to grow. Branding is often super important here. Look at some of the most obvious examples in today's world. The likes of Apple, Coca-Cola, Durex, or even Clothes.com, the world's only one-stop shop for sustainable and ethical fashion online. Clothes that look good, feel good, and do good. Other examples of businesses that have low capital requirements are businesses which do not need to own a large quantity or physical assets like factories or physical inventory. Software or social media companies that predominantly exist in the digital space are a great model. Companies like Microsoft, Meta, or other technology-based businesses with strong branding. Almost all software companies fall into this category. This is because once the software is created and the money is invested to develop it, the reinvestment back into the business is extremely minimal compared to most businesses. Couple this capital-light aspect with the element of strong pricing power and you now have an absolute megatron of an investment that can not only stand up strong and smash inflation in the face, but companies that have these characteristics are like Shaolin monks who can identify their enemy's greatest strengths and use those forces against them. These companies will benefit hugely in inflationary environments and send your net worth to Mars in a rocket fueled by burning cash that would make Elon Musk cry into his SpaceX-branded handkerchief. Even though it's true that evaluating a company's pricing power is more of an art than a science, here are some useful strategies to consider. The first is to consider how customers would react if a business raised its prices by 10% overnight. For example, some customers might say, "You know what, I don't care how much it is, I still want the damn thing." Whilst other more discerning customers might turn around and say, "Oh hell no, you gotta be kidding me, son." When prices are rising across the board in times of high inflation, make sure you invest in businesses that are easily able to increase the price of their product. You want to avoid investing in companies in commoditized industries that struggle to raise prices even during normal times. Now let's end this video with some wise words from Warren Buffett himself.
The best investment of all, I mean, if you're the leading brain surgeon in town or the leading lawyer in town or the whatever it may be, you don't have to keep re-educating yourself to be that in current terms. You bought your expertise when you went to medical school or law school in old dollars, and you don't have to keep reinvesting. And you retain your earning power in current dollars.
What on earth is Warren Buffett saying here? Well, by far the best protection against inflation is to invest in yourself. If you are the best at what you do, whether you are the best dog trainer, erotic dancer, pilot, engineer, lawyer, or mechanic, position yourself to make yourself immensely valuable to other people. The benefit of this in a marketplace economy is that you can essentially charge whatever you want for your services, and your customers will be more than happy to pay it. And remember, just because you might not be professionally trained in something, that doesn't mean it's too late to get the right skills. Steve had a friend called Jake who dreamed of a better world where fashion didn't cost the planet. Jake loved clothing and he spent hours following the latest trends online. There was simply no better feeling than walking into a room and looking like the freshest mother fudger alive. But Jake knew that many of the great brands he loved made his clothes in ways that led much poorer people in other parts of the world to suffer. Not only that, but these companies used chemicals that were the equivalent of pouring bleach into a lake full of rare species of fish. Instead of sitting around doing nothing, Jake founded his own inflation-resilient business and turned it into one of the biggest and most successful online sustainable fashion store on the planet. Clothes.com now houses a vast array of fashion that is kind to the earth and the people who made the products. Jake's business continues to submit inflation with a rear-naked choke on a daily business and is a great place for you to get some awesome clothing for your loved ones. That's all for today, folks. Let us know some examples of your best inflation-busting investments in the comment section below. Make sure you stop what you're doing right now, like this video and subscribe to our channel, the #1 investing channel on the line.